In this special WTF episode, we unpack the concept of a latent space. You will see why it is so important for understanding both LLMs and the future systems that will exhibit the capabilities of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Thank you for listening and subscribing. I'm Alex Chaduk, and this is AGI. Listen every Monday morning on your favorite podcast platform. There's only one universal driver to the human inventiveness, and that is the human laziness. People invent new things because the old things are too hard, too heavy, take too much space, or simply demand too much energy from the user, which opens up an opportunity for invention. The entire history of mathematical methods, from the simplest to the incredibly advanced, is explained with one simple statement. A particular type of problem was very hard to solve with existing methods, so we invented an even more complicated new one that allowed us to solve the problem with less effort. One such approach is a large family of mathematical methods that involved transformations. The inputs of the problem are transformed or projected into a different space. The problem is then solved in that virtual space, and then the solution is projected back into the original dimension where it provides the correct answer to the initial question. The approach is not unique to mathematics. Human abstract thinking works exactly the same. When we encounter a hard problem in our life and we start thinking about it, we project the real-world problem from our physical environment into our mind space. The people and objects from our reality are projected into our ideas of these people and objects. We can then move them around in that virtual space freely, hold imaginary conversations, combine the ideas or pull them apart until we find a sequence of actions that provides the solution to the problem. And then we try to project that sequence back into the reality by trying to perform those steps we imagined, but now with real people and real objects. Like the mathematical virtual space, our mind space is latent. Nobody can see it or travel in it except our own ideas. Even we cannot go there, only our imagination. But latent or not, this is not that important. What is important is that it allows us to operate freely in the safety of our imaginary world, as opposed to trying out any of the dangerous, expensive, and irreversible actions on real objects and real people around us. Now consider how a large language model, or LLM, solves the problem of understanding the meaning of a user's request. Before the advent of LLMs, the science of semantics, or the study of the meaning in a natural language, was an extremely complex and confusing discipline. But remember our discussion of Richard Sutton's bitter lesson in the previous episodes. The bitter lesson basically says, tell me the dumbest thing about your discipline that is statistically true, give me a large data set, and a whole lot of compute, and I will brute force your entire discipline beyond recognition. For semantics, that dumbest thing was an observation that words that have related meaning tend to appear in the natural text near each other more often than not. For example, a sentence containing the word electron is more likely to contain the word atom rather than the word pony. So if you try to imagine these three words as three random points on a two-dimensional grid, and then nudge the points a tiny bit closer to each other every time they appear together in the same sentence, and a tiny bit apart when they don't, by the time you have read the entire internet, the points for electron and atom will be quite close to each other, and the point for pony will be quite far out. Now, when we convert this distance from the two-dimensional space back into the real world of semantic meaning, we discover that electron and atom are related and pony is not. without knowing anything about semantics as a scientific discipline, or about ponies for that matter. Now, it is fairly obvious why we perceive our mind space as a three-dimensional space. It simplifies our transition from reality into mind space and back. But what about AI? Yes, today's machines need to navigate the real three-dimensional space, but when we hear that latent spaces created by neural networks use thousands of dimensions, surely any real-world navigation is not the idea. Indeed, it isn't. But to solve a problem like discovering words with related meaning, a neural network within the LLM needs a mathematical abstraction that has to have certain properties. First, there has to be a well-defined, unambiguous way to measure a distance between 2 points. There has to be a way to move in one direction without moving in the other, which is where orthogonal axes come in. There has to be a way to move at an angle so that you are moving north faster than you are moving west. And finally, there has to be a well-defined way to measure that angle. And that's pretty much it. It is easy to notice that our three-dimensional space meets all these requirements, so instead of inventing a new word for a higher dimensional abstraction, we simply call it a space too, even if it has thousands of dimensions. We cannot easily imagine such a space, let alone observe it, which is why we call it latent. But it is not that we do not want to observe the latent spaces in which a neural network thinks. In fact, if we are to trust AGI, we must demand that we do. It does not have to be that hard as it seems today. But for now, this is the WTF on latent spaces. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. But before I go, if you want to seriously impress your friends when you go out for a drink at the pub, you need to know that modern LLMs do not actually measure the distance between related words in their highly dimensional mindspace, they measure the angle. With that, until next Monday, my friends, I am Alex Chaduk, and this is AGI.